So one of the things I thought at one point was I was always impressed with Grandpa, and I always thought he was a really honest guy. And there was this convenience store that was down near across the highway from the Anheuser-Busch plant. And Grandpa was very much a creature of habit. You know, he would get his car started at exactly the same time every morning. He would wait for it to warm up the same amount of time. You know, we would drive this first 3 or 4 miles very slowly, then he'd speed up. He took really good care of his cars. But we always, every morning, stopped at this little convenience store. And then after we stopped at the convenience store, we would go all the way down to downtown Jacksonville and go to the Catholic Cathedral there.
Immaculate Conception.
The Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. And we would go to Mass together every day that I was there. And he would do it all the time. Well, he would go into this convenience store, and he would always come out every morning with 2 6-packs of beer. Put it in the back of the car, we'd drive downtown, we'd go to church, we'd go home, he'd sleep, later in the day, drink the beer. And this went on for a long time. And they were really small cans. As a matter of fact, they were cans that couldn't be sold in Florida. They were about that big. They were about 6-ounce cans, and he loved them because they would stay cold. But they were not legal in Florida. And it took me a long time, you know, as a kid to figure that out. One day I was reading the top of the can, and it specifically said on it, can only be sold in GA. And at some point, GA dawned on me that GA meant Georgia. So, at any rate, one day he asked me to go into the store with him, which was unusual. Usually he had me sit outside in the car. And so he invited me to go in, and he was usually his usual gregarious self. He said hi to everybody in the store, to the lady who worked behind the counter. He knew everybody, and that always amazed me about him. He knew so many people in Jacksonville. So we went into the store, and he walks over to this case and reaches way in the back and pulls out those 2 6-packs. And he is holding them, and he says, "Do you want anything in the store?" And I didn't really want anything, so I wasn't hungry. And he goes, "Well, come on." And we got in the car, and he didn't pay for the beer. And I couldn't understand that. That was, you know, to me, that was stealing. And so we're driving downtown, down the road that we drove down, and it wasn't a highway. It was a road that had a gazillion stoplights in it. And we got about halfway to church, and finally he turns to me and goes, "Why are you being so quiet?" And I said, "Grandpa, you stole that beer." He goes, "I did not steal that beer." And that's when he told me that what actually happened was Anheuser-Busch was so grateful as well that they had one of their truck drivers make sure that that beer was back there, however many they kept, but there was always at least 2 of them back there, that Anheuser-Busch just kept it there. Now, as long as I don't know how long it was like that, but I think it was that way till he died. And but it was one of those, nope. And his argument to me was that it couldn't be theft because it was illegal to sell it in Florida. And so how could it possibly be illegal? And so anyway, that was one of my favorite things as far as a series of stories, that, you know, he always was trying to find a way to help people and try to do the right thing. And good things usually happen, and I think a lot of that rubbed off on me. Although I was never a big beer drinker, it was just funny. You know, I would interpret some of those things differently because I didn't have any idea. I didn't know the whole story. I didn't know how it was working. And that kind of leads to another one real quick about a place called Lums. So things were different in the early 60s. And there were 2 things that he did most every day. After church, he would usually take me home and make me hot dogs or Red Hots. Red Hots were a super cheap version of sausage that would turn the water the most bizarre color of orangey red you ever saw. And it was full of spice. They were very hot, and I loved them. And they made different kinds of ketchup. Like they had one Heinz ketchup that had relish in it, and I used to love to cut it into pieces and put the relish ketchup on it. And that was always cool. Well, we would go to, every once in a while, we would go to this place called Lums. And usually, he would be running errands, and he would come back with the Lums hot dogs, because he knew I love hot dogs, and they were really good, steamed buns and stuff. But then one time, he drove me to the place, and I saw on the sign that they were steamed beer. And Granny was in the car with us, because we were going to go there for lunch. And I wouldn't come in. And my argument was, my mom and dad didn't believe in drinking beer, and there's no way I could go in there and eat beer, eat hot dogs that were steamed in beer, which has been a long-standing family internal joke, in my way of looking at that. But by the same token, there were some things that he did. For example, he would go to right near Lums was another store called Jack's Liquor Store. And Jack's Liquor Store was like the official place that you bought beer in. It was Jack's or ABC. Those were really the only two places I knew of as a kid where people could buy alcohol. And so he would go there pretty much every day when we started running errands for Granny. And he would go by there, and he would buy what he referred to as a tall, short can of orange juice. And I know this sounds really bizarre, and it's even more bizarre to think about how official this was, that you could go to a liquor store and buy a tall, short can of orange juice. And what that meant was, it was a 12-ounce can that only had 6 ounces of orange juice in it. And so they'd pull the tab off of it, and then they would take a miniature of, in his case, vodka, but it depended on whoever it was, pour it in, throw the bottle out, and then he'd drive around doing whatever he was going to do for his errands, drinking basically a screwdriver while he was driving. And nobody gave it two thoughts. And you could buy it from the store like that. They wouldn't sell it to you already in there, but you could buy
an airplane bottle, and you could buy a bottle of orange juice, and they would just mix it for you.
You had to mix it yourself. But still, nevertheless, it was one of those insane things that people did in the 60s that now would never go. So that's it on that.